Viara Takran's head pounded as she slowly regained consciousness. The last thing she remembered was celebrating with her human crewmates after a successful mission, downing a few shots of some potent human liquor. But something was wrong. Her body felt like it was on fire, every nerve ending screaming with a desperate, aching need. She forced her eyes open, wincing at the bright medbay lights. Dr. Seamers, the ship's medic, loomed over her, his weathered face etched with concern. What happened?" Viara croaked, her voice raspy. She tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness forced her back down. "You had a bad reaction to the whiskey," Seamers said. "Your unique physiology couldn't handle it." Viara groaned. Her people, the Aurelians, were close cousins to humans, but with a few key differences, like her crimson hair, pointed ears, and the iridescent third eye in the center of her forehead. That eye fluttered open, taking in the doctor's aura. Normally it glowed a soothing green, but now it pulsed an agitated red. "There's something you're not telling me," she said, narrowing her eyes. "What is it?" Seamer sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "It seems the alcohol interacted badly with the standard-issue military performance enhancement serum all soldiers get. In humans, it boosts strength, stamina, reflexes. But in you," he trailed off, looking away. Viara's heart raced as realization dawned, the fire raging through her veins, the desperate ache building in her core. She knew these symptoms all too well from her species' mating cycles, but they were never this intense before. "It's triggered an extreme arousal response," Seamers said clinically, still avoiding her gaze. "Your hormones are off the charts. If we don't get it under control soon, you could go into shock." Viara wanted to scream, to cry, to break something. This couldn't be happening. Not here, not now. She was light years from home, the only Aurelian on a ship full of humans. The shame of it threatened to overwhelm her. "What can we do?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I've consulted the database on Aurelian physiology. There's a sedative I can give you that should help take the edge off. But Viara..." Seamers met her gaze at last, his blue eyes full of sympathy. "The only thing that will truly relieve the symptoms is, well, giving in to them. Finding a willing partner to help you through this." Viara squeezed her eyes shut, hot tears leaking from the corners. The thought of propositioning one of her crewmates, of them seeing her in such a vulnerable, animalistic state, made her stomach churn. But what choice did she have? She couldn't very well take matters into her own hands in the medbay. "I need some time to think," she said hoarsely. Seamers nodded. "Of course. I'll give you some privacy. Just hit the call button if you need anything." He stepped out, leaving Viara alone with her thoughts and the raging inferno threatening to consume her. She curled into a ball, hugging her knees to her chest as silent sobs racked her body. Some legendary soldier she was turning out to be, felled by a few shots of human booze. If her superiors back on Aurelia the Ninth found out about this, she'd be stripped of her rank and sent home in disgrace. No, she resolved, gritting her teeth against a fresh wave of need. She would find a way to handle this discreetly, with minimal involvement from the crew. Viara Takran was nothing if not resourceful. She'd faced down enemy troops, hostile wildlife, in the cold void of space. She could deal with her own treacherous biology. Inhaling deeply, she uncurled her body and sat up, ignoring the answering throb between her legs. First things first, she needed to get out of this medbay and back to her quarters. Grabbing a hospital gown, she slipped it on over her sweat-soaked underclothes and peeked out into the corridor. The coast was clear. She darted out, keeping to the shadows, praying she wouldn't run into anyone. Luck was on her side and she made it to her small cabin without incident. Shutting the door behind her, Viara leaned against it, her chest heaving. Her room, with its sparse furnishings and few personal effects, had never felt more like a sanctuary. Here at least she could suffer through this in private. Stripping off the hospital gown, she stumbled to the bed and collapsed onto it. The cool sheets felt amazing against her feverish skin. Unable to help herself, Viara ran her hands over her body, trying to ease the ache. A whimper escaped her as her fingers grazed over the sensitive peaks of her breasts, the taut plane of her stomach. This was wrong, shameful. If any of her crewmates knew she was debasing herself like this, they'd never look at her the same way again. But she was past caring. Her hips rocked restlessly against the mattress, desperate for some relief. It wasn't enough, would never be enough. She needed The door chime sounded, making her freeze. Viara held her breath, hoping whoever it was would go away. No such luck. The chime sounded again, followed by a concerned male voice. "Viara, it's Jim. Doc Seamers told me what happened. I just wanted to see if you're okay." Jim Matheson, her commanding officer and closest friend on the ship. The last person she wanted to see her like this. But the sound of his voice, usually so steady and reassuring, sent a fresh wave of desire crashing through her. Viara bit her lip hard enough to draw blood. She knew she should send him away, claim exhaustion, anything. But she'd always harbored a secret attraction to the ruggedly handsome captain. Many a lonely night cycle she'd fantasized about his strong hands on her, his firm body pressing her into the mattress as he made her his. Those illicit fantasies came rushing back now, making her head spin and her core clench with need. Before she could second-guess herself, Viara staggered to the door and opened it. Jim stood there, his dark brows drawn together in concern, full lips turned down at the corners. His gaze swept over her, taking in her disheveled state, the thin sheen of sweat coating her blue-tinged skin. When his eyes met hers, they widened in shock. "Viara, what?" She didn't let him finish. Grabbing a fistful of his shirt, she dragged him into the room, sealing the door shut behind him. Jim stumbled, but quickly righted himself. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "Seamer said you needed to rest." "What I need," Viara panted, advancing on him, "is you, now!" Jim gaped at her, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Viara knew how she must look to him. Her hairy wild tangle, her nipples straining against the thin fabric of her tank top, her arousal surely evident from the damp patch darkening the crotch of her panties. She looked like a female animal in heat, which was, she supposed, exactly what she was, thanks to that damned serum reacting with her alien biology. If Jim rejected her now, she didn't know what she would do. But as she watched, Jim's expression morphed from shocked to speculative to hungry. His dark eyes raked over her trembling body, zeroing in on her breasts, her hips, the juncture of her thighs. When he met her gaze again, his irises were nearly black, eclipsed by blown pupils. "Are you sure about this, Viara?" he asked, his voice low and rough. "I don't want to take advantage." "I've never been more sure of anything," she said fiercely. Stepping into his space, she ran a bold hand down his chest, feeling the solid muscles beneath. "I want you, Jim. I need you. Please." He muttered a curse, his control snapping. Large hands seized her hips, dragging her flush against him. Viara could feel the thick ridge of his arousal pressing insistently against her belly, and it made her head swim with want. Then his mouth was on hers, hot and demanding. Viara opened for him eagerly, tangling her tongue with his as her hands fisted in his short hair. Jim kissed like he did everything else, with single-minded focus and intensity. It stole her breath and made her knees weak. He walked them backwards until the edge of the mattress hit the backs of her thighs. Viara tumbled onto the bed, taking Jim with her. The delicious weight of him settled over her as he nestled between her thighs. She could feel the hard length of him pressing right where she needed him most, and it made her hips buck restlessly. "Fuck, Viara," Jim groaned against her neck. "You're so hot. I've wanted you for so long." His words inflamed her further. Knowing he desired her, maybe as much as she'd secretly lusted after him, made her feel powerful and sexy and desperate all at once. "Then take me," she demanded breathlessly. "I'm yours." Jim made a rough sound, and then he was kissing her again, his lips scorching a path down her throat as his hands pushed impatiently at her clothes. Viara arched helpfully so he could strip her tank top off, baring her breast to his avid gaze. He lavished attention on the sensitive mounds, his every touch stoking the fire raging under her skin. Viara was lost to the sensations, her world narrowing down to the places their bodies joined. She clung to his broad shoulders as he moved over her, in her, chasing their mutual pleasure. It didn't take long before Viara was shaking apart in his arms, his name a hoarse cry on her lips. Jim followed her over the edge with a low groan, shuddering against her. They collapsed together in a sweaty tangle of limbs. Jim gathered her close, pressing tender kisses to her damp forehead. Viara burrowed into his embrace, savoring the feeling of safety and satisfaction. But even as the afterglow faded, she could feel the embers of arousal stirring to life once more in her belly. Apparently, one round wasn't going to cut it, not with the way the serum had supercharged her hormones. Jim must have felt her tense because he pulled back to look at her, a rueful smile tugging at his well-kissed lips. "Ready to go again already? I'm not as young as I used to be, you know." Viara huffed a laugh, tracing the line of his jaw with a finger. "Oh, I think you'll do just fine, Captain. The question is, can you keep up?" A spark of challenge lit Jim's eyes, and he swooped down to capture her mouth in a searing kiss. "Sweetheart, you have no idea what you're in for," he promised against her lips. As he proceeded to show her exactly what he meant, Viara couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, something good had come out of this whole mortifying ordeal after all. The next few days passed in a haze of frenzied coupling, interspersed with brief periods of rest and refueling. Viara was insatiable, the serum burning through her veins like wildfire. Jim rose to the challenge admirably, matching her passion with his own seemingly inexhaustible desire. But even the omnipotent Captain Matheson had his limits. On the fourth day, Viara woke to find him passed out beside her, snoring softly. She took a moment to admire the way the starlight played over his chiseled features, a fond smile tugging at her lips. Her smile faded as she registered the persistent ache between her thighs. The serum's effects showed no signs of abating. If anything, the need was growing stronger, edging into pain. She needed relief, and she needed it now. Casting an apologetic look at Jim's sleeping form, Viara slipped out of bed and pulled on a robe. She padded barefoot through the quiet corridors of the ship, heading for the medbay. Surely Seamers would have come up with a solution by now. She burst into the medical bay, startling the doctor from his microscope. "Please tell me you have good news," she said without preamble. Seamers blinked at her, taking in her wild eyes and disheveled appearance. "Ah, Viara, I was just about to call for you." "You were?" Hope bloomed in her chest. "Did you find a way to counteract the serum?" "Not exactly." Seamers gestured to the microscope. "I've been analyzing your blood samples, and I've discovered something unusual." Viara's heart sank. "Unusual how?" "The serum appears to be mutating," Seamers said grimly. "It's bonding with your unique Aurelian physiology in unexpected ways. I'm afraid the effects are not only persistent, but contagious." Viara stared at him in horror. "Contagious? You mean?" "I mean that anyone you've been in close contact with since your exposure has likely been infected as well." As if on cue, the medbay doors slid open and Jim stumbled in, his eyes glazed and his skin flushed. "Viara," he panted, "I need you. Now." Viara turned to Seamers, panic clawing at her throat. "What have I done?" The doctor held up a placating hand. "Now let's not jump to conclusions. We need to run some tests on the captain to confirm the transmission." But Jim was in no state for tests. He advanced on Viara, his gaze predatory. "I can't think straight," he growled. "All I can think about is burying myself inside you." Viara backed away, torn between desire and dread. This was all her fault. She'd infected Jim with this cursed serum, turning him into a mindless beast of lust. She had to fix this. "Doctor, sedate him," she ordered, her voice shaking. Seamers hesitated. "I don't know how the sedative will interact with the mutated serum." "Just do it," Viara snapped. The doctor loaded a hypo spray and approached Jim cautiously. The captain snarled, his eyes never leaving Viara. Seamers jabbed the hypo spray into Jim's neck and depressed the plunger. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Jim's eyes rolled back in his head and he crumpled to the floor unconscious. Viara sagged in relief, guilt twisting her gut. She knelt beside Jim, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'll make this right, I swear." She stood squaring her shoulders. "Doctor, I need you to put me in a medically induced coma." Seamers gaped at her. "What?" "Viara, no. We don't know what that could do to you in your current state." "We don't have a choice," Viara said firmly. "I'm a danger to the crew like this. If I'm unconscious, at least I can't infect anyone else while you work on a cure." The doctor looked like he wanted to argue, but the determined set of Viara's jaw made him reconsider. "Very well," he said heavily, "but I want it on record that I object to this course of action." "Noted." Viara climbed onto a biobed, trying to ignore the way her body thrummed with unsatisfied need. Do it. As Seamers prepared the sedative, Viara closed her eyes, sending up a silent prayer to any deity that might be listening. Please let Seamers find a cure. Let Jim be okay. Let this all just be a bad dream. The hiss of the hypo spray against her neck was the last thing she heard before oblivion claimed her. Viara floated in a haze of dreams and memories, untethered from her body. Time lost all meaning in this liminal space between sleep and waking. She could have been under for minutes or months. She had no way of knowing. Snatches of conversation drifted through the fog, disjointed and indistinct, mutating faster than I can isolate it. More of the crew showing symptoms. Running out of time. Have to try something drastic. A sharp sting in her arm dragged Viara back to groggy semi-consciousness. She pried her heavy eyelids open, blinking blearily up at a blurry figure looming over her. Wha? Her tongue felt thick and clumsy in her mouth. Viara, can you hear me? The figure resolved into Dr. Seamers, his face pinched with exhaustion and worry. I had to wake you. I'm sorry, but we're out of options. Viara struggled to sit up, her muscles weak and uncoordinated from long disuse. Seamers helped her, propping pillows behind her back. What happened? She croaked. How long was I out? 3 weeks, Seamers said grimly, and things have only gotten worse. The serum has spread through most of the crew. He swallowed hard. They're like animals, driven only by base urges. If we don't find a solution soon, we'll have a full-blown orgy on our hands. Viara's heart clenched. 3 weeks. She'd left Jim and the others to fend for themselves for 3 weeks while this thing ravaged their bodies and minds. Some teammate she was. What do you need me to do? She asked, steeling herself. She'd do whatever it took to save her crew, her friends, her lover. Seamers held up a syringe filled with a viscous, green liquid. This is a concentrated dose of the original serum before it mutated. I believe that introducing it to your system could reset the mutation, returning the serum to its original purpose. Viara eyed the syringe warily. You want to give me more of the stuff that started this whole mess? I know it's risky, Seamers said, but if it works, we can synthesize more and distribute it to the affected crew members. It's our last hope. Viara closed her eyes briefly, gathering her resolve. Then she thrust out her arm, baring the inside of her elbow. Do it. The doctor nodded solemnly and slid the needle into her vein. The serum burned like ice fire as it entered her bloodstream, making her gasp. For a terrifying moment, the all-consuming lust roared back to life, making her back arch off the bed. But then, blessedly, it began to recede. The unnatural need ebbed away, leaving behind only a lingering warmth and a sense of deep relaxation. Viara sagged back against the pillows, tears of relief pricking at her eyes. Well? Seamers asked anxiously. How do you feel? Viara took a deep, shuddering breath. Normal, she said wonderingly. I feel normal. A slightly hysterical laugh bubbled up in her throat. I can't believe it worked. The doctor's face split into a wide grin. Excellent. I'll start synthesizing more of the serum right away. With any luck, we'll have the crew back to their old selves in no time. Viara swung her legs over the side of the bed, pleased when they held her weight. I need to see Jim. I need to apologize. Viara, wait. Seamers caught her arm, his expression suddenly serious. There's something you should know first. A cold knot of dread formed in Viara's stomach at his tone. What is it? The doctor hesitated, clearly searching for the right words. The serum, it didn't just affect the libido, it also lowered inhibitions, made people act on their deepest desires without restraint. Viara frowned, not understanding. Okay, so? Seamers took a deep breath. It seems that Ensign Valar has had feelings for the captain for some time, and under the influence of the serum, she acted on those feelings. The world tilted dizzyingly around Viara as the implications sank in. Valar, the shy, reserved Vulcan science officer, had seduced Jim. Her Jim. I see, she said woodenly. Thank you for telling me. Viara. Seamers reached for her, his eyes soft with sympathy. But Viara shook off his hand, unwilling to be comforted. She felt numb, hollowed out. She knew it was irrational to blame Jim or Valar for what had happened. They'd been under the influence of an alien substance, not in control of their actions. But the knowledge that Jim had been with someone else, had given himself to another woman in the throes of passion, even if it was artificial. It cut her to the quick. "If you'll excuse me, Doctor," she said stiffly, "I have a ship to get back to." She turned on her heel and marched out of the med bay, her spine straight and her head held high. She would not fall apart. She would not show weakness. She was a soldier, and her crew needed her now more than ever. But inside, her heart was breaking. Viara strode through the corridors of the ship, her mind racing. She needed to find Jim, to talk to him, to make sure he was okay. But a part of her dreaded the conversation, dreaded seeing the guilt and regret in his eyes. She reached his quarters and hesitated, her hand hovering over the door chime. Taking a deep breath, she pressed it. "Come in," Jim's voice called, sounding weary. The door slid open and Viara stepped inside. Jim was sitting on the edge of his bed, his head in his hands. He looked up as she entered, his eyes bloodshot and shadowed. "Viara," he breathed, rising to his feet. "You're okay." Viara's throat tightened at the raw relief in his voice. "I'm okay," she confirmed. "Seamer's found a cure." Jim closed his eyes briefly. "Thank God. Viara, I'm so sorry. What I did, what I let happen, it wasn't your fault, Viara said softly. "You weren't in control." "But I should have been," Jim said harshly. "I'm the captain. It's my responsibility to maintain control, no matter what. And I failed. I failed the crew, and I failed you." Viara crossed the room to him, taking his face in her hands. "Listen to me, Jim Matheson. You did not fail. You were infected with an alien substance that stripped away your inhibitions. What happened with Valar? It wasn't you." Jim searched her face, his eyes anguished. "But it was me, Viara. Some part of me wanted her, even if I never would have acted on it normally. How can you forgive that?" Viara's heart clenched. The truth was she wasn't sure if she could forgive it. Not fully. The knowledge that some part of Jim desired another woman, even buried deep down, cut like a knife. But looking into his tortured eyes, seeing the self-recrimination and guilt eating away at him, she knew she had to try, for both their sakes. "I forgive you," she said firmly. "I forgive you because I love you, Jim. And I know that you love me. What happened? It doesn't change that." Jim's breath hitched, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I do love you, Viara. More than anything. I'm so sorry I hurt you." Viara pulled him into a fierce hug, feeling his arms come around her, clutching her tightly. They held each other for a long moment, taking comfort in the solid warmth of their embrace. Finally, Viara pulled back, wiping at her damp cheeks. "Okay," she said, taking a shaky breath. "Okay, we'll get through this. Together." Jim nodded, a tentative smile touching his lips. "Together?" he agreed. Just then the door chimed. Viara and Jim exchanged a look before Jim called, "Come in!" Dr. Seamer stepped into the room, a triumphant grin on his face. "I did it," he announced. "I synthesized enough of the serum to treat the entire crew. We're administering it now." Relief crashed over Viara like a wave. It was over. The nightmare was finally over. "That's fantastic, Doc," Jim said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you. For everything." Seamers waved off the praise. "Just doing my job, Captain. But I couldn't have done it without Viara. Her willingness to be a guinea pig, to risk herself, it saved us all." Viara ducked her head, feeling a flush rise to her cheeks. "I was just doing what needed to be done," she muttered. Jim took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "You were incredibly brave," he said softly. "I'm so proud of you, Viara." Viara squeezed his hand, a lump forming in her throat. "I couldn't have done it without you," she whispered. "Knowing you were waiting for me, that you needed me. It gave me the strength to keep fighting." Jim brought their joined hands to his lips, pressing a fervent kiss to her knuckles. "I'll always need you, Viara. Always." Dr. Seamers cleared his throat, looking awkward. "I'll just leave you two alone," he said, backing toward the door. "I need to oversee the rest of the treatments anyway." "Thanks again, Doc," Jim called as the door slid shut behind him. Then he turned to Viara, his eyes soft and warm. "Alone at last," he murmured, drawing her close. Viara went willingly into his arms, tilting her face up for his kiss. Their lips met in a tender caress, a reaffirmation of the love and commitment they shared. When they parted, Jim rested his forehead against hers. "I know we still have a lot to work through," he said quietly, "but I want you to know, Viara, you're it for me. You're my forever." Tears pricked at Viara's eyes. "You're my forever too, Jim. No matter what happens, no matter what challenges we face, I'll always be by your side." "I like the sound of that," Jim said, a smile spreading across his face. "You and me, side by side, ready to take on the universe." Viara grinned, her heart feeling lighter than it had in weeks. The universe won't know what hit it. Hand in hand, they walked out of Jim's quarters, ready to face whatever the future held. Together. In the following days, life on the Endeavour slowly returned to normal as the crew recovered from the effects of the mutated serum. There were a few awkward moments, a few blushes and averted eyes as people remembered their uninhibited actions. But mostly there was a sense of camaraderie, of shared triumph over adversity. They had faced this challenge as a team and emerged stronger for it. For Viara and Jim, the road to recovery was a bit longer. Trust had been shaken, insecurities brought to light, but they faced it with the same determination and commitment they brought to every challenge. Through long, honest conversations and a dedication to rebuilding their bond, they slowly healed the hurt between them. And as they did, they found their relationship evolving, deepening in ways they had never expected. The crisis with the serum had been a catalyst, forcing them to confront their feelings and decide what they truly wanted. And what they wanted, they discovered, was a future together. Not as captain and lieutenant, but as partners in every sense of the word. It wouldn't be easy, balancing their personal and professional lives, but they were willing to put in the work to fight for this precious thing between them. In quiet moments, stolen between shifts, in gentle touches and loving looks, they reaffirmed their commitment to each other. And slowly, surely, they built something beautiful and strong. A love that could weather any storm. The Endeavour sailed on through the stars, her crew united and unbreakable, ready for whatever challenges the universe saw fit to throw their way. Because together, they could face anything. Together, they were unstoppable.